Well,
that's new. All right, we'll see how that goes. Good afternoon, Chair, Board, and staff. Lobby is open. Recording has started.
Great. Thank you, Dustin. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll call to order the Executive Management Team meeting of the Liquor and Cannabis Board for Wednesday, August 11th, 2021. I'm David Postman, the board chair. With me is the other two board members, Russ Hauge and Ollie Garrett. Our first order of business is to approve minutes from past meetings. We have both the June 9th, 2021 Executive Management Team meeting minutes and the July 14th, 2021 Executive Management Team meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve both of those?
Also move. This is Russ Hauge. Did you hear me?
I did, yes, thank you. And is there a second?
Yeah, hold on. I need to get Ollie
okay.
on here. Hold on, give me 1 second.
Stand by.
I forgot to change her permissions. There we go. There's Ollie. Hi, Ollie.
Thank you. I was just texting you, David. Dustin, to say you haven't unmuted me. I second.
Okay, thank you. So those are both approved. Appreciate that. Our first staff presentation today is an update on the traceability system, the Cannabis Central Reporting System. And to give us that is Jim Morgan, our Chief Financial Officer. Jim.
Thank you, Chair Postman. Okay. I just wanted to take a few minutes to provide a brief update on where we are with the Cannabis Central Reporting System, or CCRS project. I did send a communications plan to you as item of information. I'm not going to go through that in any great length today. You can take a look at that. But we did want to make this our first step in the process for our communications plan to give you a heads up on what we're doing and how we're doing. First of all, the project, and I believe you were briefed April or May, sometime around that time frame, that we were moving forward with this effort. We have a fully constituted project team. Efforts are in full steam, and we're on track to deliver the new system. It looks like in December, and the communications plan will lay that out. The communications plan is designed to connect with all of the stakeholders, internal LCB, board staff, managers, subject matter experts, general staff, external stakeholders, including industry, legislature, governor's office, and also we'll have a particular focus, not necessarily just on the communications plan, but our activities, particular focus with the integrators, the folks who provide systems to our licensees. They will be the ones who will be responsible for sending the information to us for us to collect in our database. So that's where we are. The communications plan has a kind of a calendar of events there, who we're communicating with and on what time frame, and also some highlights of talking points that we'll have in those in our communications. And just a brief recap on those, and this goes way back to when the requirements for this at that point was considered as a contingency system, that it's really focused on bare necessities. What do we need as an agency? What does enforcement need to be able to do our jobs? What information must we collect? And to keep that in as simple a system and as simple of a process as possible. So the talking points address those points. So this is the first step in the process. Tomorrow you will see an all agency communication coming from me as the project sponsor, and then on down the list that you can see in the plan there, following through with all of the other stakeholders in that order. So that's all I wanted to share with you. I have time, I think, for questions.
Great. Are there questions for Jim on this from the board? I'm not seeing any. Okay. I have one quick one, Jim. The key phrase was on track, which I'm glad to hear. And looking at this calendar, I see, we'll be reaching out to the integrators very soon, licensees, within a week or so, and then stakeholders all by the end of this month, which then does give us some time, right, to make adjustments if necessary. And I just want, in between then, sort of September to November at some point, when you get those next milestones, let's reconvene and just see how that's going, because it does look good, but I'd just be really curious what you're hearing out there, and whether it gives us any new tasks between now and December.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Yes. Next up is update on some agency policies and practices, both on return to office and the new vaccination requirements. And Deputy Director Tony Hood will walk us through those. Hi, Tony.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Good to see everyone. Good afternoon. Just as a reminder, I'm going to start with what we did in July. In July, we sent a message out to all staff indicating what the then mask policy was going to be. And at that time, we gave them the option to show HR a copy of their vaccination card. We did this by appointment. We're still doing it by appointment, where you can literally just hold the vaccination card up to the camera, show HR you're vaccinated. They will check you off the list. And the purpose of that back in July was to allow employees and supervisors to know that the employees can walk around the building in the hallway without a mask on. So that was that purpose. But of course, it's even more relevant now that we have the new mandate. After that email went out, we have had 101 employees voluntarily share that information with HR. So they have contacted them and shown them a copy of their card. And of course, since then, some things have changed, but next in communication, we sent out an email at the end of July, which talked about the fact that we were going to open the building to employees who wanted to come in. It was only on a volunteer basis on September 7th. At that time, we communicated with them. We tried to communicate very clearly that, again, this was voluntary. It was not a requirement. And we reiterated the masking protocol that we have. So if you are not going to show your card, if you're not vaccinated or choose not to share that information, you continue to wear your mask when you're outside of your cube or your office. We also explained that the child and elder care allowance during telework continues. And so people can continue to care for their children or other elder care. We finally reminded people that there is a potential impact on office space if people continue to telework, and that OFM has put forward guidelines which indicate if you don't come into the office at least 3 days a week, then we should be looking towards in the future sharing cubicle spaces or having a what they call hotel space where you just come in and use a generic space if you're not coming in very often. We wanted to put employees on notice that this could happen down the road. So if we do ever get to the point where we are physically changing the cubes, we will be looking for the OFM guidelines. And I didn't want anyone, none of the leadership team wants people to be surprised if down the road they don't get their own assigned cube 100% of the time. So that was sent out July 30th. And as everyone knows, the governor made his announcement this week requiring that all employees be vaccinated by October 18th. Since then, HR has fielded a number of calls. Currently, people are asked to call their assigned HR consultant, whichever division you're in. You can call that person and ask them questions. We have had some questions about the exemptions that were outlined at a very high level, but we don't have a lot of information to give employees at this time. Regarding the medical exception, we can tell employees that the state HR has given us guidance that we will be applying the reasonable accommodation analysis to this issue. So just as if you had another medical reason to get an accommodation, HR would handle that by getting the minimum amount of information regarding your medical condition from your doctor in order to properly apply the exemption. And so, but we don't have any more information on that yet. We expect next week to get something more in writing. I don't know if there'll be a standardized form for this particular kind of accommodation, or if we'll use our general accommodation, reasonable accommodation forms that HR does on a regular basis. One of the questions that was brought up was, do employees have to get periodic testing if they fall within one of the exemptions, meaning medical or religious? At this point, we don't know the answer to that. We generally have had questions just mostly about the exemptions, and some people are simply contacting HR to find out what does this mean. Some people have been referred, if appropriate, to their union representative to get more information. And we are passing along the information agency-wide via email as soon as we get updates. Are there any questions about that? I do have a few more detailed notes if people have questions.
I have a couple. I don't see other, excuse me, from other board members. So a couple of quick ones on. So one, seeing what's happening with the virus and the variants nationwide and starting to happen in Washington State. I mean, it's possible that we could be in a position even as soon as September, after we're theoretically opening the office, that we're encouraging people to stay home again and not come in. Have you heard from state HR yet? Is that something that they're going to continue to do enterprise-wide?
We have not heard that.
Okay.
We have continued to try to communicate to our employees that this is an ever-changing environment.
Right.
And so the September 7th date, of course, was decided back in early July, and we tried to put enough caveats in there so they won't be surprised if leadership chooses to change that date or modify it in any way.
Right. And if we do, and if we're encouraging people not to come in, or certain people, or limit their time, then we reset the clock on them potentially losing office space as well. So people needn't fear that if,
yes, and
right?
just to clarify, there is no specific clock.
Right.
This is guidance by OFM.
Yeah.
I think that there would be a specific clock if, for example, we were moving right now.
Right.
Then there would be a clock, because they don't want to design something that is not going to fit with their guidelines.
Right.
But since we have the current building and we don't share with anyone currently, there's no specific clock on that.
Yeah. And then not entirely by self-interest, but I also assume when we're looking at the time you need to spend in the office, we'll prorate that for, say, the part-time employees of the agency.
I would imagine that OFM guidelines have something that would allow us to accommodate that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That is logical. That is certainly logical. I just got an email that I forgot to mention. We can send this out to employees, but I haven't yet. It is simply a vaccination timeline chart, which very clearly spells out if you get the Pfizer, when you have to get your initial dose done by, and when you have to get your second dose by, to have your series completed in accordance with the governor's proclamation. And then it proceeds to outline Moderna and J&J. So it's a nice, easy to read chart so that there's no doubt that you must complete your series by October 4th to be fully vaccinated by October 18th.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Anything more, Tony?
No, that's all I have.
All right. Seeing no questions. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now move to a licensing update from Licensing and Regulation Director Becky Smith. Becky.
So good afternoon, board members. I am excited this morning or this afternoon to share with you guys our website. And so I was hoping, Dustin, could you pull up that website for us on the social equity website? I know that Dustin had sent it out to everyone, but what I want to share here is that this is it went live last Friday, I believe, that we shared the website on the 27th of July with the Social Equity Task Force. That this site includes a series of web pages that it'll provide information about the social equity program, that I want to just note the 5 things you need to do now. This was a question that had come up during the Social Equity Task Force meeting and an area that we wanted to make sure information that we provided. So just, you know, that they get to learn more about the program, they get to get involved in the cannabis, you know, the task force activities. It shows you what they can do now, what if an applicant is interested in knowing, sign up to be part of receiving updates as well. And then we're really looking at also questions. So on there, as you see, there's licensing requirements, but then frequently asked questions or submit your question. We have already received questions in submit your questions that again went live on Friday, and we received our first question on Monday. That as soon as we start to receive a few more, we'll start to put up the frequently asked questions. But this was a great, you know, opportunity for the Liquor and Cannabis Board to get out there in front of questions that were being posed to not just the task force, but to a lot of licensing staff and enforcement staff as well. It was, you know, that my licensing, you know, that Jody Murphy and Caitlin Bomba, Kevin Millivac, all names that you guys always hear are the folks that put this together with the help of communication. It's a fantastic tool for folks to be able to take a look at and use. So I wanted to share that with everyone this afternoon.
Yeah, it looks great. So thanks to you and the communication staff and your people for doing it. And anything we can do to help the task force, we need to do. So this looks really good to me.
Well, thank you. And I also want to mention that Ollie and Justin and I met with Anjanae Slaughter. She's the social equity project manager. And last week, and I just want to thank Ollie for all of your support for what the agency is doing, but also for just really providing some guidance to the licensing, to myself, and on what next steps need to be. We shared information with folks about what tools we have and what information that we have at our hand as far as data and some information that we had received from other states about the process and how their application process has gone. So we're going to be reaching back out and providing that information to the task force. That I'm also going to be doing a presentation on the 25th to the licensing work group as well. Just to give them some updates, provide them with some information. I think whatever we can do to help move that work forward, that we're certainly willing to do that. Ollie, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, you did. One of the things that has been a little frustrating sitting on a lot of the meetings, and as I was explaining to Anjanae, was a lot of the people that are part of the task force came on later in the process and kind of didn't know how we got to where we are today. They didn't know that it was the LCB that initiated the bill that led to having the task force. They didn't know that the LCB had done all of the community outreach back in, was it January of this year or the end of last year, that we had done the outreach, that we had heard firsthand from the community and the folks that they were now hearing from on our calls. We had already gone through that process, and based on that, and based on that, we're having our staff listening in on all of the task force meetings. We are thinking about things that we could be doing now, and we are starting to go back to the agency and we are doing those things. And also a lot of the things that they were researching and doing, we already have the information at the agency. We've already done those things. We know what the other states are doing. We know if we were to look at the new census and if things were being done the way we did them in the beginning of time, what that would look like today, how many new licenses that would look like today. So we are doing this work at the LCB, and it was looked like a breakdown with the task force knowing that we are doing everything we can in our power, and what we need from them is to help us with the things we need help with getting through, whether it's legislators or whatever that is, that's what we need. But to come to us and not spin your wheels researching things that we already have the information. So that's what came out of the conversation last week, is we are not just on the outside looking in. We initiated that bill to get the task force to to get that, included having the task force and things like that. And people didn't know that and things. So it was a great conversation to have.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think, Ollie, at this point, are we, as an agency, engaged at the right amount and level? Are there things we should be looking at?
Well, I think the call on Thursday led us to know that Becky should be the one. Becky should be included on those Thursday calls that's with the task force or with the project manager of the task force, because that's where they can come and check with us to say, here are the things we need answers to before we start doing these things. Do you already have the answers and things like that?
Right.
And that's the piece that was missing.
Okay, that's cool.
One, to help that as well, we're putting together a task force work group for the agency. So myself and Tony is going to be co-chairing that with me as well.
Right.
That in it, so we have so all the information isn't coming from licensing, right? Because this is an agency movement. This is a agency work, and both Rick and Tony have been very supportive about what our next steps will be. So bringing the other directors in, and so everybody's involved in the conversation. And of course, Ollie will be representing the board on that work group.
Yeah, terrific. Okay. Other reports, Becky?
Yeah, so I just want to move on real quick and share with you. We've also been doing I like doing pilots. So we've been doing a pilot with our cannabis unit. And that's because over time we've heard that change requests, or we call them alterations, have been taking a long time. So we wanted to find the top 6, maybe the top 10 alterations that we could move to customer service. Just like liquor, it should be really the same process as liquor has, and not as complicated. We want it to take days and not months to get these through. We want our licensees to be able to reach out and get something done quickly, instead of having to feel like they're jumping through all these hoops and I'm not going to submit it because it's going to take months. And that I'd rather just get, just not put it in. So we want to have those alterations submitted. We want to be able to have that information contained in the licensing file. It helps enforcement do their job, certainly. It helps us in the future do our job. So that will be started the second week in September. We'll move all of that work over. Right now, we're providing some training. We're going to begin providing that training to our customer service staff. But I thought that was important to mention because, again, that we survey our licensees in cannabis to see what we can do differently, how we can improve their, the process. And this was one of the things that we kept hearing over and over again. And the cannabis manager jumped on it. And again, great thing for us. Another thing I wanted to mention is that that we had our very first application for a combined or shared tasting area. And as you recall, that Senate Bill 5549, AKA we call it the Distillers Bill, allowed for a tasting room for brewery, winery, and distillery to be together. That we've sort of been waiting for this to happen. And so we did receive our first application and we are moving that forward to getting that licensed. One other thing is I do want to mention is as always, we're seeing a lot of special occasion requests coming in. We actually had 4 that they decided not to do the event. And that was because of some of the, that what's happening out there as far as with COVID. And so they pulled back their event, but more so than anything, we're seeing a lot of these requests continue to come in. So I think that's it for me.
Okay.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions?
I don't see any more. Okay, thanks, Becky. Appreciate it as always. Russ, no? Okay. Great. We're running right on time, and we'll move to a communications and media update from Communications Director Brian Smith.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman and members Garrett, Hauge, hello. I'll be real brief here and touch on just a few things that's going on, some of which you've already heard. Communications has been very involved with the divisions and the work that you heard already. Piece of good news is that I told you last time that we are now fully staffed in the communications office. I didn't give you a name last time, but the young woman's name that has joined our team is Samantha Gooder, and she's been off to a great start. Chair Postman joined us this morning on a huddle, and speak for you, Dave, but I think he felt at home, among a group like us that he's able to talk shop, and we kind of understand where he's coming from on that, and I think he comes a little bit understand where we're coming from. So thank you, David, for joining us.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me.
Good, and I want to extend that to you, Ollie and Russ, that if you're ever want to join our communications team and engage us on anything, and to meet Samantha, I'd be happy to work with Dustin to set that up. Just moving on, a couple things. You heard Becky talk about the social equity webpage with licensing. That was all them and the development and the content of what it was going to be. But it's like handing over a blueprint to somebody. And so our team actually put that together. Brad and Julie did all the work on that. And that's actually a pretty extensive amount of work. And it was a priority for us because we knew it was a priority for licensing and for Ollie and our work, and that's prominent on with the social equity stuff. And so we really pushed them, and they worked hard to be able to get that up in satisfaction. So it was a good collaborative effort with the licensing team, which I think we almost always have. The communications planning and implementation for the traceability onward, that was the communications plan that I wrote that you have. And working together with the project team to develop the planning, and then next thing is implementation. And I'm right with you, Dave, is that once we start understanding what's needed out there, and you pivot, you move, and you provide what is needed also in the time. And I think we're set up to be able to move quickly as we need to. Also working with the communications director for the State Department of Agriculture on a collaborative piece of legislation that we're both talking on. And so we've had some initial meetings and developing some work. Hector Castro is a communications director over there at Agriculture and a good guy and someone that we have collaborated with in the past. And so that's going well. And lastly is that a lot of work, of course, always on COVID. We know that that's a dynamic, as Tony talked about, what we need to communicate with employees, what we need to have on our website, what we need to be able to have, you know, on our intranet so that people have the information that they need. And it's clearly it's something that's on people's minds. And when it's got this much riding on what's currently riding on the COVID stuff, then we want to make sure that we're providing and filling that gap when there's a need for communications, and we're ready to be able to support Rick and Tony and whatever we need to be able to do there. One thing I wanted to circle back real fast though is when you were looking at the social equity page, I want you to know that if you went to the home page, that's one of the 5 prominent, what we call the dynamic display on the website. So it's in big graphical format, would be one of the things that would catch your eye when you first come to our homepage. And what you saw there was like what we call the landing page, the first page you go into if you clicked on that site. So yeah, so you got it right there, Dustin. You're always on the money kind of thing. So it's one of these things that come up and it looks sharp and it captures your eyes, I think, when you first look at it like that. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention to know that it's prominent, and I think that people will be able to find that quickly. And then I just lastly on the media, so media's actually been very light. I tell you guys that you could always expect a couple a day. I think it's probably even been lighter than that in the last couple of weeks. Maybe August is a month when people sometimes take time off, but we'll take it. I'm happy to not get inundated with media all the time because we got plenty to do. But that is the main thing. If there are any questions, I'm happy to address any of them.
Okay, questions for Brian? No? Okay, yeah, thanks for having me this morning, Brian. It was great. I had a good time, and I'd encourage others because I heard a story about a communications director, a French exchange student, and a monkey in Spokane. So I'm not going to tell you any more than that. You got to go to a communications huddle to find out how that all ties together. But it really was a good time, and I did feel at home. So thanks for all the work and putting together a team. It's great.
All right.
All right, we are moving on to enforcement and education with our director there. You are Chandra Brady, director.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here to share with you the work we've been doing in the Enforcement and Education Division. There we go. Thank you. Dustin is going to drive for me because he's a much better driver than I am. I'd like to share with you our July 2021 status report. We're going to talk about the education we've been doing, talk about some enforcement, AVNs, dispute resolution, some compliance checks and premises checks, talk about administrative time versus field time just a little bit, and then I'll share with you some accomplishments, and then I'm going to move right on to my second topic, which will be sharing with you some of the leadership work and development we've been doing in the division. So as you can see, licensee support and education continues even as we're navigating these potentially post-COVID, potentially re-COVID times. There's been a lot of education happening even amidst the increase in our compliance checks. Again, as you can see, we had over 2,000 educational contacts with almost 350 hours and almost 3,000 people receiving that education. And that happens in many types of formats. Sometimes it's when we stop by to do a premises check. Sometimes our licensees ask us to give a class on how to ID people, for instance, to help prevent youth access. And so they're out there doing that on the daily. And these are some of the topics that you'll find us out there giving education on. These are our top 10 topics. And as you can see, public safety incorporates about 60% of that education. And then some of it is just other support for our licensees and other rules that we also are responsible for regulating, but they're not necessarily related to public safety topics. Thank you, Dustin. So this is just a different way of looking at the data. You can see that in July, there were 1,782 events and 611 hours, and that's how that's reflected. When we start looking at complaints, you can see that we had 108 complaints logged with our division for the month of July, 15 in the cannabis industry, 65 in liquor, and 28 in tobacco. And shocking numbers, you're going to start seeing only 1% of those were related to COVID. That's the first time well, for me, it's a first in my entire career with the LCB. But for you guys, it is the lowest number of complaints we've had in the last 24 months. And the division has a goal of closing out the majority of our complaints within 60 days. Most of them are less than that, but some of our complaints are more complicated and take more time. And so this month they met that goal. And this will show some of the change and the decline we've been seeing since a high. You'll see there in December of 2020, this compares our COVID-19 complaints to our total complaints received, and the percentage is related, is the green line, and that's the 1% that I was talking about. And if you look back to August, you can see that we were at 93%, and then again, the high was in December at 95%. So just goes to demonstrate the flexibility and responsiveness as opposed to reactiveness of the employees that work in your enforcement and education division. So we'll break it down a little bit. So you can see the liquor complaints in July. There were 65 of them in the liquor industry. These don't include the COVID complaints. I want to pull those out so we can see what the non-COVID complaints look like. And I always like to compare this to another month. So if we look back to July of 2020, then you can see that we're much lower. But if you remember in July, what we were doing is reopening. And so a lot of people were citizens, licensees, not always sure about what the rules were and how many people were supposed to be there and what their behavior was supposed to be. And so we received a lot of calls about violations or potential violations. And in the cannabis industry, we looked at 15 complaints in the month of July. And then if we go back to July of 2020, we were looking at 6. One thing to remember is the cannabis industry was impacted differently by COVID than our liquor counterparts as far as the shutdowns. And tobacco, we're looking at 28 complaints. Much of these were related to youth access that we started seeing over the last couple of months, and which is one of the reasons why we reconsidered what our position had been on compliance checks as related to youth access. And you'll see some of that data coming up. So what was interesting to me is when we show February 2020 to July 2021, the other data and the changes in our division that line up with the AVNs is compliance checks. And so as we started to do more compliance checks and starting to be out in the communities and focusing on youth access, because we can actually get our youth investigative aides back out in the field safely, we start seeing more AVNs for that. And because one of our priorities is youth access for the agency, this is something that we take very seriously. So as you can see, when we start breaking down those AVNs, there were 62 in liquor, 23 in tobacco vapor, and 4 in the cannabis industry. You will start to, this other number that's down here, that's 11% of businesses had repeat violations. We should start seeing that go down again. One of the areas that caused that to go up is when people start making decisions for political reasons as opposed to compliance reasons. We had some repeat violations because of COVID where people just said they didn't agree with the rule, therefore they weren't even going to attempt to comply with it. So that number should go back down as this all levels out. Our alternative dispute resolution out of the liquor, as you can see, we had 20 violations move forward, paid uncontested. One of our licensees just opted to go straight to formal hearing. 7 were resolved at informal hearing, and then we had 0 forward to formal from informal. And in cannabis, similar numbers, smaller numbers. They look bigger because they're bigger on the graph, but 2 uncontested just paid. 0 went straight to formal hearing. 4 were resolved at informal hearing, where we worked out a resolution, and then 1 decided to go forward to the formal hearing from informal. So that unit is doing a lot of work there in finding compromise and helping people get on the path to compliance, because that's the real goal.
That's terrific. Can we pause 1 second, just take a question from Member Hauge
Yes.
while we're on the slide?
Sorry, I didn't see a hand. Yeah.
No worries. Now, when you're talking about alternative dispute resolution, are you talking about the process where after an AVN is issued, the license holder is referred to our hearing examiner for a compromise penalty? Or is there some other program that we're using?
That's exactly the process I'm talking about. So they can choose to say, yes, I did it, I'm just going to pay the fine. They can choose to have ask for a formal hearing, or they can go to informal hearing and negotiate a resolution with our hearings officer.
Who is the hearing examiner reporting to right now?
So Shell reports to Deputy Chief Ranke.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you'd ever like to talk more or meet with that team about their process, that's always available. Thank you, Justin. So again, just another way of looking at this slide. I think the reason this picture is less helpful for me, just seeing that the rate of uncontested AVNs is 97% in liquor and 47% in cannabis. Thank you. So compliance checks in the liquor industry. Last month we started and we had a compliance rate of 76. I always have my data guy telling me that, well, we don't really have a lot of data, so that's not really a solid number. So as we get out and do more checks, we get more confident in our data. And as you can see, it stayed pretty steady. In July, we went down 1% to 75 and more than doubled the number of checks we did. I tell our enforcement team, I remind them that their work is the work of getting the IAs hired, keeping them safe, getting them out into the field, and doing the compliance check. It's our industry's work to make sure that they're not selling to youth, and then we do what we can to support them in that process. Let them know when they've failed the check, and then provide whatever education and training to their employees that we can. And cannabis had a great first month right out of the gate at 96%. And in July, they dropped a little bit down to 87%. So we're doing some work and just communication and information and education with all of our industries. But we are getting back out there and doing compliance checks, and we're letting our associations and folks know that we're doing that. And again, this is a process. We've not been doing them for a while, so everybody's relearning, both our employees and folks out in the industry. And this is again a priority, so we're gonna keep on keeping on. And tobacco and vapor climbing back up in the numbers and staying pretty steady around 80, 79%. And when we start talking about premises checks, we're getting out there and having contact with our licensees, doing education where necessary, answering questions, and we got out to 2,801 premises checks in the month of July, which is pretty amazing. In the cannabis industry, we made it out to 325 locations. So we're getting out there and visiting our people, and that's good news. Tobacco and vapor premise checks, 311. And then this is just a little demonstration. We talked about last time how as COVID changes, typically we spent 60% of our time in the field and 40% of our time in the office, but that has really flipped for us since COVID started. And we're doing a lot more of our work, just like everyone is, remotely. And so now we're spending about 60% of our time administratively and 40% of our time in the field. And then I think that's it for the enforcement. Oh, just I wanted to talk quick about some accomplishments and celebrations. We've been really focusing on partnerships within the agency and outside of the agency, and just really kind of bragging about all of the work that we all do together. We've been doing some work as a team of directors. We've developed some team rules. We have a regular lunch that we're doing, and just working really closely with licensing and with communications, helping us communicate both with our employees and with our industries. Finance is always a great partner, and we couldn't do the work we do without policy and HR. So just working on focusing and celebrating partnership. We have a lot of I'm going to talk more about that slide, Dustin. Thank you. We have a lot of promotions. Right now we have 2 lieutenant openings, so we're doing some testing and interviewing. We just had 2 captains promotions. If you know Captain Bollinger or Captain Magrill, formerly lieutenants, feel free to reach out to them and congratulate them. I got to take a little over a week vacation, and I didn't worry once about what was going on here in the Enforcement and Education Division, and that's because we have a great command team, and they handled everything, and there was not a concern in my mind. It was a great time. So just know that you guys are well cared for. Compliance check restart, that was a lot. We had an old IA list that hadn't been accessed in a year and a half. We had people who hadn't done these forms that hadn't been used, documentation that hadn't been conducted, and they jumped right on board and got it done and did a great job. So huge kudos to the division. We've been working on, we have a lot of vacancies coming out of COVID over 2025, and we worked with HR and finance to propose an HRC3 position in HR that will work specifically on helping us backfill those vacancies that we have pending. We are working through the examiner's transition, lots of brainstorming and one-on-one meetings so that we can make sure it's a comfortable and successful transition of the examiners into the enforcement division, so that it is a good fit for everyone. We had our first rule contest where we're learning to promote a culture of being responsive to the changes in our industries. Captain Dixon was our winner, and proposed that a rule that is duplicative to another rule be deleted. So we're working through that process with our policy team. You can look for more of that work as we look to partner with licensing for our next contest. We've been doing a lot of leadership work. Your captains and lieutenants got together and talked about what the mission of the agency would be, and I'm working on developing some strategic objectives. And as we do that, all the line level folks are having regional leadership workshops too, so they continue that work. And then finally, there's been a lot of work going on by Letty and Deputy Chief Ranke to get our policies up to snuff, as a lot of this law enforcement legislation that you may have heard about has passed. It means we need to change our policies too. So just making sure that we're leading that effort and in compliance moving forward. Any questions about the data of the division?
No, I think not. Thank you.
Thank you. And really quickly, I'd just like to share with you some of the leadership work we've been doing. We've talked a lot about it, and I'd like to present to you the mission statement and next steps. Just as a reminder, when we were looking at what the mission for the Enforcement Division would be, Enforcement Education Division, apologies, we focused on how that mission would support the mission and vision of the board, and also the goals and values of the board. Those remained present and in the forefront in our mind as we worked through this process. I believe that in a mission, we need to talk about the reason we exist, the reason our division exists, and have clear statements about what our product is, what our service is, who are our customer and clients? What is the scope of our work, and how do we want to be perceived by others? And I'm happy to present to you the mission statement developed by your deputy chiefs, captains, and lieutenants of the Enforcement and Education Division. It talks about our goal to consistently contribute to the state's international reputation as a safe place to live, work, conduct business, play, learn, and visit. That we'll do everything we can to provide high quality services within the resources provided to us, and that we want to be known as a professional, compassionate, responsive, fostering community partnership, and adding value in return for the funds which we are entrusted. So we're developing our long-range strategic objectives, and really quickly on the left there are the 6 categories that those objectives will fall on: being responsive to our board and stakeholders, being proactive leaders, and then of course our operations and public safety services, our administrative services. Partnering will always be a priority and value for us, and then an education and relationships within the industry. Really quickly, I'll share with you that we do have a calendar in place with a timeline, that this kind of work doesn't happen overnight. So we're being very intentional about moving these ideas and processes forward. And then next slide, Dustin, our next steps are finalizing the timeline, announcing our strategic objectives, and working on action plans to implement our goals. And if you don't have any questions, that's all I have for you today.
Thank you, Director. I like your mission statement. It seems to reflect what I know of your team's work, and as I've told you and some of them before, when we get a chance to read enforcement reports and AVN and field reports, it's always impressive to me sort of how cool your guys and women stay. You know, there's a level-headedness there, even when they're met by some real strong resistance in the field. And I think people think of this as sort of, walking into a bar and checking out what's going, or a cannabis store. It can be stressful. There is tension. There's one of your officers had hands on them from somebody. It happens out there, and it just seems like the team just has just the right kind of response to that, and that's what makes them professionals. So it's appreciated and noticed.
Thank you, Board Chair.
Okay, and see no other questions. Thank you, Director. Keep it up, and we will move to Agency Director Rick Garza for your comments. Hello, Rick.
Chair Postman, board members Garrett and Howby, thanks for being with you today. Thought the staff just did a great job of updating the board. It's going to sound redundant to the staff because we just had a management team meeting and discussed many of these issues, but I want to start just by thanking Jim for leading us through the traceability update and the change to a new reporting system. We've done this once before. It was several years ago. I think there were some lessons learned about how to do that, maybe a little differently and a little bit more streamlined. So I want to thank Jim for that. And then I just, I said this yesterday, Becky, just a proactive effort that you did in creating that web page for the social equity applicants and for the task force, the work of communications, just really well done. And then you then reminded us that the internal work group that you've created of the staff and not more divisions than just licensing, to make sure that we're prepared when those recommendations come from the task force to us. So I just thought the web page looks great, and I just want to thank all the staff for their work on that. The return to office and Tony's update with respect to the governor's new vaccination requirements for state employees. I think you said it, and we've been very consistent. I think the board, myself, and the leadership team, David, about making sure that we're very flexible with our employees as we look to return to work. And now with this, with this COVID, the positive cases surging, you kind of spoke to it for a second when you said, we're going to have to pause and wait and make sure that if we return people, that we do so and they're safe. So I think just want to reiterate, I think we've been very consistent throughout the year and year and a half, that we're going to be very flexible to not force our employees to return to the workplace. And frankly, I think the governor's move was probably something that, again, because of the surge in cases, is one way of making sure that people get vaccinated. So thanks, Tony, for that update. And also for Brian's update with respect to communications. I think with a new member, and yeah, you go from 3 to 4 or 2 to 3, and it's a pretty significant increase in the number of folks. And thank you, David, for being able to check into that meeting. You know, Chandra, thanks for your update. You know, you would never think we'd go a year without doing compliance checks. It's just never happened, right? It took a pandemic, and I think it was 14 to 15 months that we didn't do compliance checks. Frankly, I thought the compliance rate would be even lower. So, you know, if you don't do compliance, you're not going to get a very high compliance rate. And so we'll get that number back up to where it was, but it's interesting to see the compliance checks and the rates and stuff within the different products that we regulate. But thanks again, Chandra, for your update. I guess one of the things I want to share is this meeting only happens once a month. And as I shared with Ollie yesterday, and I hope I have with David earlier this week, and then Russ, I cannot be on the call at 4, but I'm just going to reiterate it here with everyone, is I want this time with you to be productive for you. We're reporting information that we hope is important to you because it's important to us. But looking ahead, if there are issues that you think you would like us to cover, things that you're hearing from licensees, things that you're hearing from inside the organization, feel free to reach out to us, the directors, and let them know that, hey, I'd like you to spend a minute or two sharing information with respect to this area, whether it's licensing, enforcement, and typically, as we all know, externally, it's typically licensing or enforcement questions. But I want to make sure, as I chatted with Ollie yesterday, that we're giving you the value that you need out of the meeting and giving you the information that you need. So it's not just us presenting. If you have questions that you would like us to cover, please feel free to reach out to any of us to share that information. And so I think the staff really covered most of the work that's a priority today. Board Postman and Chair Postman Garrett and Hauge. So with that, I'll stop and take any questions you might have.
Yeah, I'll check for the questions. The only thing I'd say, Rick, in terms of what we'd like to cover, I would just always encourage you and your staff to talk amongst yourselves. So if somebody has something that they think needs more time with us, that they want to get into some more details and go in depth with us, that's okay with me. And we could sort of hold some of the others. I thought today was great. The balance was great. But we can use this time, you know, in a priority way if we need to. So feel that you've got that flexibility to let us know if we should carve out more time for a single deep dive. I think that, you know, this is a rare meeting that we get to all sit here and have this conversation with a full board and your executive staff. So. Questions, Russ or Ollie? Comments? Nothing at all? Okay, I'll just check, Rick, and see if you had any other additional team updates or anybody on your team have anything they want to add before we close up for the day.
I do not, but staff, feel free to jump in if you'd like. We have a few minutes.
Give them a quick second if they do. And okay. Well, that's the end of the agenda. I will echo Rick, your echoes of praise for the staff. You know, I will admit that I have a tendency to hear criticism louder than I hear compliments. It's something I'm always working on a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, I hear a lot of great things about the staff of the LCB, not just internally from teammates, but from external stakeholders as well. And you know, it is across the board. And often what I would say is that what seems to me is that somebody's watching from afar. They can be more critical and they hear things or they just sit in a meeting. But when they have that face-to-face interaction, when they're able to sit down with people and hear the you know, have a sensible conversation, it's really appreciated out there. And so I just will try to bring down the volume, my own personal volume on the criticism side and not react to that as much. But it's great to hear all those good things, and I certainly experience it myself. So I'll just take this chance to thank you all for the work you do every day here. And seeing nothing else, we will adjourn today's executive management team meeting. Thank you. We'll see this group again next month. Have a good day.
Thank you.